My name is Diana Osei. I am 38 years old, and on a Saturday morning in March, I opened my front door to a woman I had never seen before in my life. She said her name was Karen. She said she was my husband's wife. She had been married to him for 7 years. So had I. I looked at her for 3 seconds. Then I said, "Please, come in." She came in. We sat at my kitchen table. And the woman my husband Marcus had been married to at the same time as me told me everything she knew. It took 2 hours. By the end of it, I understood that my marriage had never been what I thought it was. By the end of it, I also understood that Karen was not my enemy. She was the only person in the world who knew exactly what I was feeling, because she was feeling it too. Let me tell you about Marcus first. Marcus Osei was 41 years old. He was a civil engineer. He traveled frequently for work, long stretches away, 2 weeks here, 3 weeks there, occasionally a month. I had accepted this without question for 7 years because Marcus had always come home. Because when he was home, he was present and warm and the person I had chosen to build a life with. He had a gift for presence. When he was with you, he was completely with you. He made you feel like the only person in the room, in the city, in his world. I know now that this is not a quality. It is a skill. And Marcus had been practicing it across 2 households for 7 years. We had met at a charity fundraiser in October 2016. We were married 11 months later in September 2017. A small ceremony, 40 guests. My mother cried. Marcus's mother had died 3 years before. He had no family at the wedding except a cousin I'd met once. We had no children. We had tried. It had not happened. I had grieved this quietly for years. Marcus had been sympathetic and patient, and never once made me feel inadequate about it. I know now why he was patient. He already had children, with Karen. The object that sat between Karen and me on my kitchen table that Saturday morning was a photograph. She had brought it in her bag. She placed it on the table when she sat down. It was a wedding photograph. Karen and Marcus, September 2017. My wedding was September 2017. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Karen and Marcus were standing outside a church. She was in a white dress. He was in a dark suit, the same dark suit he had worn to our wedding. I recognized the suit before I recognized anything else. I said, "Is that the suit he wore when you got married?" She said, "Yes." "Why?" I said, "He wore it to ours too." Karen looked at the photograph. She said, "The same weekend." I said, "What?" She said, "Our wedding was September 9th. What was yours?" I said, "September 16th. Same month, 1 week apart. Marcus had married Karen on September 9th, 2017. He had married me on September 16th, 2017. 7 days, same suit, same man. I need to tell you about Karen before I tell you what we did next, because Karen matters, not as a footnote to my story, as a person. Karen Mensah was 36 years old. She was a secondary school teacher. She had 2 children with Marcus, a boy named James, who was 5 years old, and a girl named Lily, who was 3. She lived in Birmingham, 2 hours from my home in London. 2 hours. For 7 years, Marcus had maintained 2 complete lives 2 hours apart. She had found out 3 weeks before she knocked on my door. A hospital appointment. She had needed Marcus's full name and date of birth for a form. She had looked him up in the hospital system because she could not remember his NHS number. What came back was not what she expected. A flag, an administrative note, a second registered address. Not hers, mine. She had sat in that hospital waiting room for 20 minutes. Then she had gone home. Then she had spent 3 weeks verifying what she had found before she knocked on my door. 3 weeks of looking at everything with new eyes. The travel, the absences, the gifts that arrived on her birthday without explanation for the delay, the specific way he was always home for Christmas, but sometimes missed other holidays without a reason she could fully remember. 3 weeks of the same thing I was now doing in real time, sitting across from her at my kitchen table. Reconstructing 7 years. We talked for 2 hours. Not about Marcus. Not really. We talked about our lives, the shape of them, the things that had seemed normal and that now looked different. She told me about James and Lily. I told her about the fertility treatments, 3 rounds. Marcus had come to every appointment. She was quiet for a moment when I said that. Then she said, he told me he had a medical condition, that he had been told he could not have children, that it was something he had been dealing with since he was young. I stared at her. I said, he has 2 children with you. She said, yes. I said, and he told me we couldn't have children because of a problem with me. She said, yes. I sat with that for a very long time. Marcus had known I wanted children. He had known Karen already had his children, and he had allowed me to go through 3 rounds of fertility treatment and 3 rounds of grief while he already had a son and a daughter 2 hours away. That was the moment, not the bigamy, not the 2 weddings 7 days apart in the same suit. That was the moment I understood exactly who Marcus was. Karen had a plan before she knocked on my door. She had spent 3 weeks not just verifying what she had found, but also preparing for what came after. She was a practical woman, methodical, the kind of person who thinks through consequences before she acts. She had already spoken to a solicitor. She had already established that Marcus's marriage to her was legally registered first. September 9th, which meant my marriage to him 1 week later was legally invalid. I was not his wife in the eyes of the law. She was. She said, I wanted you to know that before anyone else told you, because you deserve to hear it from me and not from a court document. I said, does Marcus know you're here? She said, no. I said, does he know you know? She said, no. Not yet. I said, how long do we have before he realizes? She said, he is in Dubai until Wednesday. She said it flatly, the way you say something you have said many times in your head, before you say it out loud. I said, Dubai. She said, that is what he tells me. When he is here with you, I assume he tells you something else. I said, he tells me Edinburgh, work contract. She said, yes. He has been telling me Dubai for 7 years, and you Edinburgh for 7 years, and himself, whatever it is, he tells himself to make this make sense. I want to pause here, because what Karen and I decided to do in the next 4 days while Marcus was in Dubai is the part that required both of us to be better than we felt in that moment. Matt, if you have ever had to hold yourself together when everything around you was falling apart, drop a comment below and subscribe right now. Because what we prepared and what happened when Marcus walked through the door on Wednesday is the part that changed everything. Karen stayed for 6 hours that Saturday. We did not spend all of it on Marcus. Some of it we spent on practical things, solicitors, documentation, the specific legal and financial steps that 2 women in our situation needed to take before the situation became public. Karen had already done significant groundwork. She shared everything, her solicitor's advice, the documentation she had gathered, the specific order of actions that would give both of us the strongest possible position. I called Grace Okafor, my solicitor. She answered on a Saturday afternoon because I told her it was urgent. I told her the situation in 4 sentences. She said, I'll be at your house in an hour. Grace arrived at 2 p.m. She and Karen's solicitor spoke by phone for 40 minutes. By 5 p.m., I had a clear picture of my legal position. My marriage was not legally valid. 7 years of believing I was a wife, and I was not. Not in the way the law recognized, but I had rights. 7 years of financial entanglement, a jointly mortgaged property, shared accounts, pension contributions, 7 years of a life built together that the law could see, even if the marriage certificate was invalid. Grace said, the bigamy charge alone is significant. In England and Wales, bigamy carries up to 7 years imprisonment. 7 years. The same length as both marriages. I found that detail worth sitting with. On Wednesday morning, Karen and I were both at my house when Marcus came home. He had a key. He opened the door. He walked into the kitchen. He saw Karen at my table. He stopped. The specific quality of his stillness in that moment was different from every other kind of stillness I had seen from him in 7 years. Every other stillness had been presence, warmth, the gift of complete attention. This was the stillness of a man whose architecture had just collapsed. He said, "Karen." She said, "Hello, Marcus." He looked at me and I said nothing. He said, "Diana, I can explain." I said, "You don't need to. We have explained it to each other. We have had 4 days." He looked between us. He said, "This is not what it looks like." Karen said, "It is exactly what it looks like." He said, "I love both of you." I know how that sounds, but it is true. I have loved both of you for 7 years, and I could not choose, and I did not want to lose either of you. Neither of us said anything. He said, "I was going to tell you. Both of you." When the time was right, Karen said, "You were going to tell us?" He said, "Yes." She said, "James is 5 years old, Marcus. Lily is 3. When was the time going to be right?" He had no answer for that. The silence stretched. Then Karen placed the wedding photograph on the table between them. She said, "September 9th. She slid my wedding photograph beside it. She said, "September 16th. She said the same suit. He looked at the 2 photographs. He looked at us. And something in his face changed. Not guilt, not remorse. Something smaller and more honest than either of those. Recognition. The recognition of a man who has been found, who has finally run out of road. Grace filed that afternoon the bigamy report to the police, the financial claims against the jointly held property, the documentation of 7 years of financial entanglement. Karen's solicitor filed simultaneously in Birmingham. Marcus was arrested on Thursday morning. He was charged with bigamy, with fraud, with obtaining financial benefit through deception across 2 households over 7 years. He did not contest the bigamy charge. His solicitor negotiated for 6 months on the financial charges. In the end, he pleaded guilty to bigamy and 2 counts of fraud. He is serving 4 years. The house Marcus and I had jointly mortgaged was sold. My share of the equity after 7 years of joint payments was £87,000. The pension contributions Marcus had made to a joint pension scheme in my name were protected. £43,000 accumulated over 7 years. Karen received a settlement from the marital assets she was entitled to as his legal wife. Her children will be provided for through a formal maintenance arrangement enforced by the court. Karen and I still speak, not often, not as friends exactly, but as 2 people who share a specific experience that almost no one else in the world understands in quite the same way. She called me on the day of the sentencing. She said 4 years. I said, "I know." She said, "Is that enough?" I said, "It is what it is." She said, "Diana, I am sorry you were not his legal wife." I said, "I am sorry you were." She was quiet for a moment, then she laughed. Not a happy laugh. The specific laugh of 2 people who have earned the right to find something darkly funny because the alternative is worse. I laughed too. It was the most honest moment I had had in 7 years. The 2 wedding photographs are in Grace's evidence file now. I do not need to see them again. What I carry instead is the memory of Karen sitting across my kitchen table at 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. A woman I had never met, who had come to my door because she believed I deserved to know the truth from a person and not a document, who had spent 3 weeks preparing not just for her own situation, but for mine, who had brought a solicitor's number and a plan and the specific practical grace of someone who had decided that the worst thing that had ever happened to her was not going to make her treat another person badly. She owed me nothing. She came anyway. Here is what 2 wedding photographs taken 7 days apart taught me. The people who hurt you most are sometimes the ones with the greatest gift for presence. The ones who make you feel seen, chosen, like the only person in their world. Watch what they do when they are not with you, not what they say when they are. And when a stranger knocks on your door with a hard truth, let them in, offer them tea, sit down, listen. Because sometimes the person standing on your doorstep is the only one who can give you back the reality you have been living outside of for 7 years. Karen gave me that. She owed me nothing. She came anyway. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And subscribe. I am here every week with a new story. Same ending every time. She stayed calm. She stayed quiet. Then she won.